It is so good to be with you. I'm Ariel Reshef in for Katie Tur today. Former Attorney General Pam Bondi just wrapped her closed-door testimony before the House Oversight Committee. She was pressed on the DOJ's handling of the botched Epstein files release and the investigation. We're going to break down what she said and the timing of today's hearing as the department faces scrutiny far beyond the Epstein fallout. Bondi was fired back in April, you may remember, by President Trump. And since then, the DOJ seems to be ramping up its focus on one big goal: going after Trump's foes. Take any recent headline, for example, the new DOJ investigation into legal funding for E. Jean Carroll, the woman who won a civil suit against Trump after a jury found he sexually abused and defamed her. The second indictment of former FBI Director James Comey, the president's almost $1.8 billion so-called anti-weaponization fund, that just hit a major setback in court, and we're going to talk about that. The DOJ's mass deleting of information and case data tied to the January 6th attack on the Capitol, and the continued fixation on 2020. According to the Washington Post, FBI agents have been interviewing current and former election officials in Milwaukee just weeks after seizing ballot and election data from Maricopa County in Arizona and demanding ballot records from Wayne County, Michigan. The list does go on, and the targets, regardless of how thin the evidence or cases may be, are now starting to stack up. Let's get started here. Joining us now, MS Now congressional reporter Michael Schnell. MS Now senior investigative reporter Carol Leonnig is here in studio with me. MS Now political analyst and writer at large for The Bulwark, Tim Miller, joins us, and former Manhattan Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Roiphe. Michael, starting with you, the closed-door interview with Bondi has been in the works for a while now. She was subpoenaed back in March and initially was supposed to testify in April on the 14th. Give us the big takeaways so far today.
Yeah, it seems like the committee came into this closed-door transcribed interview, Ariel, with a lot of questions that they were hoping would be answered by Pam Bondi, thinking that she was the Attorney General. She was the Attorney General at the time of this Epstein files debacle, the rollout and such. And they had a lot of questions they were going into hoping for answers. And it seems like they haven't gotten a lot of those questions answered. The main reason why is because on a number of occasions, Pam Bondi had said that she was not in charge or the point person on the Epstein files rollout. Instead, it was Todd Blanche. Take a listen to, for example, or rather for example, what she said in her opening statement. I'll read it for you in part. She said, quote, "I do not lead every aspect of this effort or conduct that document review myself. I delegated oversight over this process to Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. The team of professionals who reviewed all of the materials that we collected assured me the only materials that were withheld were either non-responsive, privileged, or duplicative." Of course, Ariel, this comes back to the fact that a number of the documents that should have been released were not released, and B, the documents that were released, the redactions, there were a lot of questions about it. Names of rich and powerful individuals, their names were blacked out, while identifying information and the names of some survivors and victims, they were left out in the open. But it all gets back to this idea of that throughout this closed-door deposition, we're told Pam Bondi had said that she was not responsible for it and she didn't have the answers because it was Todd Blanche. A few other interesting points that we're hearing from members who were inside the room was Robert Garcia, the top Democrat on the panel. He had said in the middle that he asked Pam Bondi 5 times about his communications with President Trump involving the Epstein files. She would not talk about their conversations. And interestingly enough, Pam Bondi also said that she wasn't made aware of Ghislaine Maxwell's transfer to a different prison beforehand, that she had found out already when it was a done deal. So certainly some interesting details. But when it gets back to what the goals of this closed-door transcribed interview were for these members of getting some substantive answers, it doesn't seem like they've achieved that because Pam Bondi said she doesn't have the answers. It's Todd Blanche who does.
Michael Schnell, thank you so much for your reporting. You know, Rebecca, here's what Republican Chairman James Comer said about the state of the Epstein probe before the hearing. Let's take a listen.
This case hasn't been thoroughly investigated. I think that's one thing that we all can see. When I subpoenaed the estate, I believe with all my heart some of the estate documents that we made public, we made 100% of the estate documents public. I believe that there were many in the Department of Justice had never seen many of those documents that were in the estate. And I believe that people that had been looking at the estate had never seen any of the documents the Department of Justice had. I believe there are documents that New Mexico officials had never seen that were in the Southern District of New York. I believe there were documents that were in Palm Beach that they had never seen in New York. So what we're trying to do is just connect all the dots.
They're trying to connect the dots. Rebecca, what do you make of the fact that it seems like lawmakers are actually making more headway on an investigation than the DOJ did?
Right. I mean, this is especially when you need a Department of Justice that's both competent and professional and independent. And it's in this moment, and particularly with this case, we don't have that. And we don't have the kind of faith in the legitimacy of the investigation. And so, I think we are left with other bodies that are traditionally not particularly good at this, not particularly well in a good position to be doing this in an apolitical way, who are stepping in to fill the hole.
Carol, one thing that's been kind of unusual in this circumstance has been that we see Harmeet Dillon, the Attorney General for U.S. Civil Rights, representing Bondi. She's in the room. Is that weird?
Super weird, or soup's weird, as my kids say.
Soup's weird.
Soup's weird. In fact, when she first notified the court, essentially, that she would be representing or standing for the former Attorney General, I mean, all of us in the newsroom were like, wait, what? This is not how DOJ runs. To Rebecca's point, there's a lot of questions about the legitimacy and, appropriateness of almost everything that's happened here. I mean, the idea that James Comer even is saying, like, he's going to try to connect the dots. Like, well, really? Were you trying to connect the dots when you decided to have a transcribed, not under oath interview where nobody from your party appeared except you? If he wanted to connect the dots, there are a lot of ways he could have gone about it different than this.
So with Harmeet Dillon in the room, what's behind that? Why is she there?
Well, I think she hasn't told me. I can't know what's in her heart, but what sources have told us is that she wants to stand up for the flag of the Trump administration and stand up for her colleague, even though Bondi was pretty humiliatingly removed from her job, not fired by tweet, but very publicly fired by the president for failing to deliver the scalps that he wanted, for a number of things that he wished she could move on in a more weaponized way. Even despite that, she remains a loyal soldier, at least on the front, and Harmeet is part of that team. I want to add one last thing, if you will indulge me, which is I think it's so ironic that today Pam Bondi says, really Todd Blanche has those answers. Is the only thing...
Why didn't she when she was in seat?
Is the only thing that Pam Bondi knew about was the false statement she made that she had a list of all of Epstein's clients? Is that the only thing she did in this? It's curious.
So Republican members of this committee seem to be walking this fine line, Tim, of, they forced the Clintons to do this publicly. Then they allowed Bondi to do this behind closed doors. It seems as though their justification for that is that the Clintons didn't comply right away, but Bondi did. Is this the transparency that people are looking for?
Well, no, this is all post-hoc kind of rationalization and trying to do what they can. And I think that Comer, there's a handful of Republicans in the House that genuinely seem to care about this. It's worth pointing out, be that like Nancy Mace or Lauren Boebert or some of the others. And I think that Comer feels that pressure as well. So I think that they do feel like they have to do something. But obviously, it was extremely politicized, the manner in which they did it.
And we talked a little bit about irony. Let's talk for a second, Carol, about the anti-weaponization fund that the president was trying to set up. The Virginia judge just temporarily blocked that. Is that a surprise?
Yes and no. I mean, there were serious questions about whether or not the people who are filing to block this have the standing to do it. I mean, there's a real high bar to meet for standing, and other parties are considering coming forward who might have a better shot at that. But it is not surprising that when Judge Brinkema, a pretty important and veteran judge in that district, it's not surprising that when she could not get answers to her questions and plaintiffs were ignored by the Department of Justice when they asked pretty basic things like, are you going to not transfer this $1 billion+ figure before we're able to brief this case? When they wouldn't answer those questions, you could sort of see why a judge would conclude this. I think perhaps the most interesting thing that's happened in this case was the federal judges who stepped forward yesterday with a pretty compelling argument that, in their view, a fraud has been committed on the court by the fact that how this settlement was created, did not disclose the immunity that would pass along to Donald Trump and all of his family, stretching back decades.
So where does this go next then, Rebecca?
Well, the judge will obviously consider the full, after full briefing, whether or not, in fact, there is merit to this case. And really, obviously, the main issue is going to be the standing question, the question of whether this is a party that has been directly hurt by this anti-weaponization fund. But, I think the stall is a pretty significant setback. And I also do think it's a signal of something that we've seen more broadly in the courts, which is a questioning, a pushing back on the Department of Justice, that the courts have in some ways given up some of the presumptions that they had before, that what went on within the Department of Justice was kosher, that there's a lot of second guessing now and pushing back in order to try to get at the truth, and a lack of the kind of trust that we used to have.
So, Tim, there's a lot here. How do Democrats take all of these things that we're seeing? There's clearly a distaste for what we're seeing when it comes to what's going on with the DOJ, when it comes to what appears to be President Trump leveraging a lot of these levers to go after his political foes. So what do Democrats do? Where do they put their focus right now? What do the voters care about?
Well, this is kind of basic advice, but part of it is just simply relentlessness and trying to force this into the public sphere. And there was a massive shift when Jerry Connolly, who is kind of an older Democrat, died last year and was replaced on the Oversight Committee by Robert Garcia, who's much more media friendly, much more online. You saw the amount of pressure that the administration started to feel on the Epstein files in particular. I think that is going to be the job of the Democrats, both running for office this year and then if they take back Congress next year, both in the House and the Senate, being more relentless about looking into these, all of the various, cover-ups. Now, the administration is going to play ball to varying degrees, but you don't know exactly what's going to come into this. I always point back to the Trey Gowdy Oversight Committee that had, 47 Benghazi hearings, maybe 86 Benghazi hearings. It felt like overkill at the time, and he was mocked. But what came out of those hearings? Well, actually, the revelation that Hillary Clinton had a private email server, and it led eventually to the Jim Comey letter that maybe led to Donald Trump becoming elected president in 2016. So part of this is you have to, go as far and wide as possible and as repetitive as possible to try to draw attention to these issues, because it's not popular, whether it be Epstein or the Trump corruption. When people learn about this, unless they're super Trump fans, like people don't like it, even folks that voted for him.
Right. So does he let go of this? Does Trump let go of the anti-weaponization fund? Are they going to continue to pursue the proper channels to try to push this through?
I think I don't think that Donald Trump cares that much about the midterms, to be honest. And so I don't know that and I think that he sees this fund both as kind of righteous compensance for the people that he thinks were targeted during the Biden DOJ, even though that's not true. But I think he also sees it as potential lever going forward, that potentially this stuff could be sent out to friends that he might want to do other stuff on his behalf over this year. So I think he's going to continue to fight for it.